Shadows Behind Bars: The Deadly Reality of U.S. Prisons, a true crime documentary. It was early morning at Lee Correctional Institution in South Carolina when violence exploded without warning. Suddenly, prisoners ran through the housing units, wielding knives and makeshift weapons. Screams echoed off the concrete walls. In one brutal moment, 7 men were stabbed to death. Others were hurt badly. Blood stained the floors, and the prison guards were overwhelmed. It was a nightmare inside. Gang members fighting gang members, and no safe place to hide. This riot began as a robbery in a cell, but quickly turned into a full-scale attack. Rival prison gangs joined in, and the anger spread fast. The fight leapt from one cell block to another. Some men tried to escape, others were cornered. The chaos turned the prison into a war zone, a dark world where fear ruled. As the violence raged, some prisoners fled to their rooms. Others ran out in the prison yard, desperate to survive. Guards tried to respond, but there were too many fighters and too few officers. By the time the riot was under control, 7 inmates had died and more than 20 were injured. It was the worst prison riot in the U.S. in decades. But how did things get so bad at Lee Correctional Institution? And why did it all erupt in such bloody horror? The answer lies in years of tension, overcrowding, and gang power behind those walls. A few years before that deadly morning, Lee Correctional Institution was already known as one of South Carolina's most dangerous prisons. It held many inmates who belonged to powerful gangs: the Bloods, the Crips, and the Gangster Disciples. These groups didn't just fight outside. Inside the prison, they had their own rigid hierarchies, rules, and territories. The prison was badly understaffed. There weren't enough guards to watch all the cell blocks, especially during nights and weekends. This made it easy for gangs to operate, recruit, and settle their scores. Overcrowding made things even worse. Too many people in tight spaces made violence more likely. Investigators later said that these conditions created the perfect storm. Tensions came to a head one day in the F3 housing unit. According to reports, a robbery went wrong. One man stole from another, or tried to, and things escalated. The man who was robbed belonged to a dangerous gang. So did the man who did the stealing. That conflict triggered a chain reaction. Prisoners began calling their gang allies in other parts of the prison. Weapons appeared. Shanks, homemade knives, made from whatever they could find, were brandished.
Some very dangerous inmates rushed toward other gang members, demanding revenge. Others ran in fear, trying to hide or flee to safer parts of the prison. As the fight spread, more prisoners joined in, not just from F3, but from F5 and F1, other housing units. It wasn't just a simple fight anymore, it was war. Inside, prison staff tried to regain control, but the sheer number of rioters made it almost impossible. Guards had to keep their distance while calling for backup. The prison's own layout worked against them. Narrow corridors, high walls, and locked gates made it hard to move quickly. Meanwhile, inmates were either attacking or running or hiding. Panic reigned. As the bloodshed continued, men fell. Some were stabbed in common areas, others were attacked in their cells. The violence was not random. These were not small scuffles. Gangs picked their targets. According to later investigations, some of the dead were rival gang members. Others were caught in the crossfire or were trying to run away. Then came the moment when things got even more terrifying. 2 high-ranking gang leaders were targeted. They tried to flee near a prison gate, but they were cornered. In the chaos, several inmates surrounded them. One of them was killed. The other was murdered as he desperately tried to escape. The riot spread to the F1 unit, which was alarmingly close to the administrative buildings, the heart of the prison's power. As the fight spilled into different parts of the prison, other inmates watched in horror. Some stayed silent, frozen with fear. Others whispered to each other, sharing news of who had been hurt or killed and who was still fighting. Lines between friend and enemy blurred. Trust vanished as quickly as it had formed. At that moment, just when people thought the worst might be ending, a new wave of violence surged. More prisoners surged toward the courtyard. Some set makeshift traps, Others used stolen weapons. The riot was not just a moment, it was a full breakdown of the prison's order. And just as guards were about to regain some ground, a horrifying sound echoed through the prison halls. A scream, sudden and long, cutting through the chaos. Someone had fallen. Someone was hurt badly. No one knew what was coming next.
The scream echoed through the concrete halls, chilling everyone who heard it. Guards and prisoners froze for a moment, realizing the fight was far from over. In the courtyard, two rival gangs had locked eyes, knives and shanks gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Blood stained the floor, and smoke from a small fire filled the air. Every step could mean life or death. Inside the prison, chaos had become the new normal. Some prisoners crouched behind metal doors, trying to catch their breath. Others, desperate for safety, climbed onto tables or shelves, hoping no one would notice them. The few guards on the floor shouted orders, but with dozens of fights happening at once, their voices were drowned out by screams, banging metal, and the clatter of weapons. Survival depended on instincts. Who could move, hide, or fight fast enough? Amid the violence, some inmates remembered the prison's rules, unspoken codes that could save them or cost them their lives. Gang members stuck together, protecting their allies, while others tried to slip away unnoticed. One man, a new prisoner named Marcus, had just arrived a few months before. He had no gang affiliation and no friends in the prison. As he crouched in the shadows, he watched men he didn't know fight for survival, some screaming, some crying, some striking without hesitation. Marcus realized quickly that in this prison, trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Outside the courtyard, a group of inmates cornered a smaller gang member who had angered the wrong people. The man tried to defend himself, but he was outnumbered. A knife glinted in the hand of his attacker, and the prisoner fell to the floor with a thud. The sight sent waves of fear through nearby inmates. Anyone could be next. The guards could only watch from a distance, waiting for backup, knowing that stepping into the middle could get them killed too. Meanwhile, in the administrative area, warden reports came in fast. The prison had to call for reinforcements from other facilities, and local police were on standby. Tension inside the prison reached the breaking point. Some inmates, seeing the chaos as an opportunity, tried to steal keys, unlock doors, or start fires. Others barricaded themselves in their cells, praying the fighting wouldn't reach them. Smoke and screams turned the prison into a scene of total mayhem. Amid all this, investigators later discovered that the riot was fueled not only by gang rivalries, but also by months of rising tension. Overcrowding had forced men into tighter spaces, and understaffed guards couldn't prevent small conflicts from escalating. The stolen items, grudges, and minor assaults had been like sparks in a powder keg. Now, the fire had grown out of control. As the hours passed, some prisoners tried to form temporary alliances to survive. They whispered to each other, "Stay together, stay alive," and it worked for a short while. But even these temporary bonds could break in seconds. A misstep, a wrong word, or even being in the wrong place at the wrong time could make someone a target. One guard described later how he moved down a corridor, carefully stepping over injured prisoners, when suddenly a shank flew past him, narrowly missing his shoulder. The fight was no longer just between prisoners. It had become a storm in which everyone, including staff, was at risk. Behind the walls, fear was the only thing all inmates shared. As night approached, the prison seemed to grow darker, the chaos more unpredictable. Fires burned small patches in the corners, casting shadows on the walls. Screams echoed through the hallways in a haunting rhythm. Marcus, the new prisoner, realized he had made it this far simply by keeping his head down and moving quietly. But he knew this was only temporary. The violence had not ended, it had only shifted. Then came the moment that changed everything. In one of the main corridors, a large fight broke out around the supply room. Several gang leaders had confronted each other, weapons drawn, and it was clear that this was no longer a random clash. It was a targeted battle for control. One prisoner lunged at another with a homemade blade, and the man fell, blood spreading across the cold concrete floor. Marcus could see the chaos unfolding around him, realizing that no one inside this prison would walk away unscathed tonight. And then, a loud alarm rang through the prison, signaling lockdown. Steel gates began to slam shut. Men ran in panic, trapped in areas they hadn't expected. Some screamed, others froze, unsure which way to go. The air was thick with smoke, fear, and sweat. In the middle of it all, Marcus's heart pounded. He had survived the first wave of violence, but he knew instinctively that the worst was still to come. The alarm had barely faded when the prison erupted again. Steel gates clanged and men screamed as they realized they were trapped in dangerous corridors. The restricted area, known among prisoners as the power zone, because gang leaders controlled it, had been breached. Several high-ranking gang members confronted each other, eyes locked with hatred, weapons ready. Marcus, crouched in the shadows, could barely breathe. Every sound felt amplified. The clatter of metal, the thud of bodies hitting the concrete, the screams of pain and terror. In that moment, survival depended on speed and instinct. Marcus watched as one gang leader lunged at a rival, swinging a sharpened shank. The man fell to the floor, groaning in pain. Another inmate rushed in to intervene, only to be struck down himself. Chaos moved like a wave, sweeping through the corridors, consuming everyone in its path. Guards tried desperately to separate the men, but with so many attackers, their efforts were almost futile.
Amid the madness, a small group of inmates huddled together for safety, whispering instructions and sharing makeshift weapons. Marcus realized he had to make a choice: stay hidden and hope for rescue, or fight his way out. He chose to move, creeping along the walls, avoiding the fray, slipping past fallen prisoners. His heart pounded as he passed one man who had been stabbed multiple times, blood pooling beneath him. The scene was horrifying, a living nightmare. In the administrative wing, the warden and responding officers coordinated to regain control. Reinforcements from other facilities arrived, armed and ready, shouting orders and moving strategically through the corridors. Slowly, the chaos began to die down as prisoners were separated and secured. Medical teams rushed to the injured, many of whom were barely conscious, their bodies marked with deep cuts and bruises. 7 inmates were dead, and dozens more were hospitalized. Even after the immediate violence ended, tension remained thick. Prisoners eyed each other warily, aware that alliances could change in an instant. Marcus finally found a temporary safe spot and sat, exhausted, listening to the groans of the injured and the shouts of guards giving orders. The reality of what had happened began to sink in. He had survived one of the deadliest riots in U.S. prison history, but the experience left him shaken to his core. Investigations later revealed that the riot was fueled by years of mismanagement. Overcrowding, understaffing, and unchecked gang influence created conditions that made this bloodbath almost inevitable. Prisoners who survived would carry the memories of the violence for years. Some would emerge hardened, some traumatized, and some forever changed. As the prison slowly returned to order, one truth became clear. Inside the walls of Lee Correctional Institution, violence was never far away. Every day, inmates faced threats that could erupt without warning. The scream that had started this chapter was just one of many, a reminder that in America's most violent prisons, darkness and danger were constants. Marcus knew that life behind bars was a constant gamble. Some survived by strength, some by cunning, and some simply by luck. For him, surviving meant paying attention, staying quiet, and moving with care. But the echoes of the riot would haunt him and the prison for years to come. Shadows Behind Bars exposes the deadly reality of life inside U.S. prisons. From gang wars to stabbings to fear and survival, it reveals a world few ever see. The story of Lee Correctional Institution shows that violence isn't an accident, it's a daily reality. Behind every door, in every corridor, shadows linger, waiting. And for those who live inside, the fight for survival never truly ends.